Franchise game is an odd breed of TTRPG that has existed since the dawn of TTRPGs. Games based on other media franchises aren't uncommon by any means. Hell, anything can be based on another media if it's popular enough. But TTRPGs are pretty unique as it lets you dive into the world a little bit more actively. You have your classic Ghostbusters TRPG from West End Games, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and even the Alien RPG from Free League. Jesus, entire companies have based their entire business model off licensed properties, though there are a pretty unique tone shift in regards to these games. It started as a how do we expand the world and promote the property, but over time it morphed into how do we promote the property only kind of deal. Take Avatar Legends. Using Magpie's own PBTA system, the Kickstarter is selling you a host of Avatar merch rather than an Avatar TTRPG, even though it made a couple $1 million. Not even really expanding upon the lore more than saying, hey, here's a bunch of characters you already know. Or the Assassin's Creed RPG coming out where you have the privilege of playing already established characters. But you're not here for my Madame Tussauds philosophical debate. We're here for franchise games, and we're doing this for two reasons. One, if any of these people want to give me the okay to make it official and make legit money, hell yeah, I'm gonna sell out, baby. On the other hand, it's interesting design within constraint, forcing yourself to work within boundaries and think outside the box while maintaining its shape. But let's lay down some ground rules for what constitutes a decent game to make a franchise game out of. First, there has to be room for other characters to exist and do things. This may seem silly, but when you realize it's a lot easier to add a random guy to Star Wars and a bit harder to add a new person into the cast of Stefano Memeverse. Second, there has to be more than just one story to explore. Again, may seem obvious, but some settings and things exist solely to tell a story or be a character piece. You have a lot of room to maneuver when it comes to getting into trouble or going on adventures in Mass Effect, but you're going to struggle to get some mileage out of a Captain Harlock game due to the fact that Captain Harlock's entire story is about Captain Harlock and his crew. Finally, this is more of a me thing, but we have to have enough setting to work with to justify a unique game as well as not be legally distinct variant of another. There are countless garbage isekai out there, with each one being more convoluted than the last with its bizarre magic system and internal lore, even though if you really look at these, a lot of them are not much to actually work with. You'll realize that when you read, watch, or play one of these franchises, it doesn't really exist outside of its own bubble, far away from everyone else, and doesn't actually make too much sense outside of that little sphere it's working with. So after asking around, I got 3 ideas. These aren't flawless, and I'll be the first one to say that there are some unique issues with writing a game for all of these. The goal is not to deviate too far from the source material, keeping it as accurate as I can, and you're also going to notice that these are all vidya games, because those are pretty easy to adapt and have a deeper focus on player input versus player result. That and already having some internal systems to play around with gives you a better idea of what is and is not a foundation to build off of. As a man of infinite wisdom and barely contained creative energy, here we go. Palworld was released in January 2024 and amazingly enough turned out to be a smash hit for a game that boils down to Ark survival Pokemon evolved but with a gun. I got the game out of curiosity and found myself drawn into it. I don't really know why, I usually don't care for these types of games, but the combination of exploring, capturing, shooting, and an odd sense of discovery let me get into it a lot more than you'd think. The proposition to make a Palworld TTRPG was actually being floated around since March, which started as a joke, developed more into a curiosity as we realized that, we already might have a game for this. Nautomons is a game about Freakomon genetic abominations from Gene Forge, with the creator being an explicit force changer in the midst of a fight. A valid tactic in the game is to dive on a weak creator and not even bother with her much more powerful Nautomon. So why use this game as baseline? Of course, it'll need some changes to make it work perfectly, but that's why this is here. Nautomon originally uses a D20 system with a deeper emphasis on swingy, violent combat, but we're working with a few new market realities here. If we shift the game to a 2d10, most of the math remains, but averages our results around to 11 instead of 5% across the board. This leads into our attributes being able to remain relatively the same, deviating from Palworld's key stats into a more RPG-friendly stat line, if needing a bit more renaming to sound less pretentious. If I were to summarize what the plan would be, it would be streamline in exchange for stuff. Traits gone, affinities gone, we can replace most of that with a relatively short short list of skills split into crafting, combat, and traversal, you want the main showstopper right now, don't you? Pals. Pals follow much of the same math regarding Nautomon, though as stated above, we're removing much of the input into creation in exchange for being a simple process. Most of the pals fall into really three categories: non-combat pals, utility pals, and finally our baseline combat pals. However, there are quite a few pals to work with, and guess what? We can break them down further with a lot of back-end creation. Let's take for example something simple, like Lamball. Lamball is a non-combat small pal. Let's say a level 1 variant has these as its stats. Due to its non-combat nature, it doesn't have any bonus armor or health or even an elemental affinity due to being a neutral element pal. Basically, we'd be applying a bunch of math, tables, and charts behind the curtain for each of the 120 pals. But here's another catch. Most of the initial pals are also pretty one-note and pretty easy to put together. Hardest part would be finding all the various special tags and building a chart to roll for them all. But if we wanted right off the bat, we should be able to create, theoretically, infinite numbers of pals due to just applying whatever equation and notes we pile together. Even their special abilities sometimes boil down to being able to ride them or being able to fart out new resources. Getting the combat moves, though, the same principle applies. Hell, we could even simplify the map due to the fact that all pal attack effectively go to short, mid, or long range instead of having to worry about individual squares. Most of the abilities needing some background math to make it work, mostly because all of the special hubbub, each element in Palworld doesn't actually have that many skills, and most of them are the exact same kind of skill. Do a bunch of background math and suddenly you can create theoretically any move available for any element. This may seem like a lot of do math and it'll work, but remember, I would be doing the math behind the scenes. All the player would see is Hydro Laser and let their pal use it, and then swap it out for a new pal with Electro Laser, and so on and so forth. Combine both of these together and you can add a copious amounts of guns, armor, and more guns, and some light base building, and ta-da! You have a Palworld TRPG that can be adapted to any changes in the game almost instantly, and allow for the GM to adapt anything they could want and let players fine-tune anything they want. Given enough incentive, I could probably get a minimum viable product out in about 3 months, and most of that would just be trying to remake all the different types and then some. Kenshi is one of the most unique games you'll ever play, if only due to the fact that it's such an uncaring world and Okran's holy light and guiding hand will liberate us from ourselves. Released in 2018, is one of those universally developed games that span far, far longer though. I've sunk way too many hours scouring the world and engaging in various hyperfixations, including a full cat-long kill with a souped-up squad, even though most died in the process. But Kenshi, the tabletop role-playing game experience, well, that's a question that haunts a lot of people. What is Kenshi? Due to its open nature, it's a lot of different things. You need combat, you need base building, squad management, faction relations, and everything else. But the problem is, that's a lot to worry about. But we have to think a little bit smart, which is to say, we're not going to be using a D100 roll under BRP system variant that has been proposed before. Fuck it, we're using a Rollmaster variant. At its core, it's going to be a D100 system, a D100 trying to roll better results by adding our appropriate skills to the mess. Attributes would just be a variety of derived statistics to keep us alive more than anything. Without any threat, we're not necessarily under threat of failing. Thus, we split rolls into continuous progress, success margin, and opposed rolls. Either we're building up a result to the final result, taking more time for being worse at it, trying to achieve a quality of success with a penalty associated with the difficulty, and finally our opposed roll trying to beat one another for a win. Let's say I'm attacking you with a katana. I make my roll of 1d100 plus melee combat plus katana. If I score a 70, I throw the ball into your court as you're now trying to parry me with a 1d100 plus melee defense plus katana. If you score better than me, you clash away the blow and everything's fine. Score worse than me though, and I'm going to hit you. From here we can have a few different options. We can Riddle of Steel this shit by calling a strike beforehand, cutting, stabbing, bashing, and all those other fun ways to modify a swing, or just make a random roll to determine a hit location. location. Let's say I hit your arm. I deal damage equal to my katana depending on the quality and my own innate strength, and bada bing bada boom, I have now ripped your arm off and we have a combat system. The system would have a more deeper emphasis on getting it to scraps with the right plan in mind. Throw in some mechanics for multiple attacks per turn, some stagger mechanics, and you can make a character a whirlwind of death if you're skilled enough while still maintaining a threat if you're ganged up by a dozen thugs. It would also mean you can make characters who aren't qualified for combat hold their own, but find themselves useful for support roles, or just a guy who does stuff. Kenshi is expansive enough to cover a breadth of stories. Hell, you can set an entire campaign in one of the major regions if you're really good, not to mention a continent-spanning adventure of get mauled by blood spiders, beak things, or gorillas. I would say starting people off as a high-low tier character, and you're off to the races to figure out the mysterious world going on, and try and make a ton of cats while doing it. And then getting mauled by copious numbers of gorillas. Why are there so many gorillas? Oh, my Lost Technology. How I adore you. Lost Technology is a strategy game by Studio 4D, a Japanese doujin game that can best be described as Brigadine's scrappy cousin. Tall, lore dump, quick, and shit's fucked, and Lost Technology is being fished up across the continent. You're one of the empires and have to survive and conquer your enemies. It is an RTS strategy game about fantasy cultures clashing in bloody wars and lizardmen being objectively the funniest faction due to just eating people with philosophical intentions and because they're hungry. Game's not even actually fully translated yet, but what is on offer is interesting, and the world presented is a fascinating due to the clash of cultures, ideals, and old technology alongside magic. Because when you're a faction whose secret technique is religion and chemical warfare, or being the only people to employ the power of the gun, you're working in a pretty weird setting. TTRPG wise, well, there's already adventuring heroes and monsters to deal with, and this is being a Japanese RPG, so fuck it. Let's make it a nice and easy 3d6 system. The game itself is pretty direct with its attributes, attack, defense, resistance, so why not just adapt those to the system itself? At our core, most characters aren't too impressive, just a bunch of dumbasses gallivanting around the countryside looking to get hired by one of the factions and proceeding to get stacks. Whenever we want to do anything, we're going to have to roll 3d6 and add an attribute. Probably nothing like the in-game attributes, numbers-wise, though the thought counts. If we beat the target number, we succeed. Nothing too impressive or wacky about this kind of situation though, but there's a catch, and a funny one at that. Lost Technology is a strategy game, so let's take our simple game and give each of us a squad of dudes that hang on to us, supporting us in the midst of the fight, and surprise, I'm just pitching you Flag Bearer again, bar it being a 3d6 game. Yeah, the basic framework of this is already technically in place, being a single person supported by a squad of infantry to buff out your guy, still allowing individual heroics, as being an adventuring hero means that you are a force multiplier more than anything. But being a member of a goon squad with a dozen of your closest friends beating the snot out of your local elf for having the audacity to exist without your permission is your job. Arguably though, I just need to tone down a lot of Flag Bearer's Muso elements and focus more on keeping everyone alive per fight. Keep fights snappy and to the point, and ta-da, you have an adaptation of a game that's really easy to make and really easy to play. And hey, it's also completely expandable as well. Is there a rhyme or reason for talking about this today? Not really. Franchise games will stick around as long as there are franchises and people are convinced that TTRPGs are a half-decent investment of the advertising budget. As long as companies feel like they can continuously make something, they'll continue. But there's a reason some of the best and most beloved games are based on properties. They're things we love to explore, understand, and find ourselves heavily invested in. Diving into a world you're already familiar with to interact and enjoy is a pleasure, whether that's blasting ghosts in your hometown, fighting against the system in a galaxy far, far away, perhaps going on a rather unexpected journey. This is also a method for me to pitch companies to give me the power of money to write their games with a bespoke tabletop variant. Don't even need to give me a license for it. I'll just write it as an advertisement gig. There's big money in appealing to a niche market, people, and news outlets will be more than willing to run stories on brand new product TM without playing the legal hokey pokey. I am your top guy. My name is Notepad Anon, and these were some little ideas. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And many thanks to the patrons as always for the continued support. Godspeed, good luck, and if you have any franchises you'd like to dive into, feel free to leave a comment about them. Sayonara.